Hey, welcome back to another Loop Station tutorial. My name is Playgue, and today we're going to be talking about every single effect on this device. I have either made or in the process of making an in-depth tutorial for every single effect on this device. So if you're curious to learn more about a certain effect on here, feel free to check out any one of the tutorials based on that effect that I've made. With that said, I'm not going to be going into extreme detail or sharing 100 cool tricks that you can do with each one of the effects. The purpose of this video is to get a general understanding of what each effect does. Like, what is the purpose of the effect? What does it do? A filter, what this essentially does is you have a set of frequency ranges, right? You have high frequency and you have low frequency, and they all have different wavelengths. Those are called hertz, right? What this effect will do is it will filter any given frequency range. If, for example, we have a low pass filter, the MK2 will have individual filters, but on the MK1 we just have it all under one category, which is great. We have low pass filters, a band pass filter, and a high pass filter. So what the low pass filter does is it will create basically a sweep. It'll filter out the high frequency sounds. So like 22,000 hertz starting there, and then just sweep its way down, cutting the higher frequencies. What that ends up doing is now you're hearing the higher frequencies to the point where you can't even hear me anymore. High pass filter does the same thing but in the opposite direction. It removes all of the sounds from the lower end of the frequency range. A band pass filter, what this does is it will filter everything above and below a certain band range. So you can think of it like a upside down U. Wait, that's a letter N. Oh my gosh. What are letters? An N-shaped graph that moves across a certain band. Next, we have a phaser. Essentially, what this does is it will take a sound or a signal, it'll make a copy of it, and then it'll delay that copy a little bit by a certain amount, similar to a flanger or a chorus. However, what this does is it applies all pass filters to it. Now, what's an all-pass filter? An all-pass filter doesn't cut any frequency necessarily, but it does phase shift it, hence the name. What this essentially means is that it will delay certain frequencies different than other frequencies. You get this really weird sounding effect, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with a filter. Like, what the heck is going on? Next up, we have the flanger, which, like I said before, is very similar to the phaser or the chorus. And the flanger, it makes a copy of the sound, just like a phaser would. But what this does is it delays it again, this time only around 5 to 20 milliseconds though, so it's very, very short. And then what it does is it modulates that copy of a signal. What modulating means basically moves it back and forth, or even makes it bigger or smaller. In this case, it's moving it back and forth like this at a given rate. So that's what this rate is. So what this ends up doing is it ends up creating harmonics. So the flanger will sound more intense than let's say a phaser, but it is a very, very cool effect that is not used very frequently. But when it is, it's really, really cool. Next, we have Synth. It turns any input sound into a synthesized noise, and it kind of sounds like a cat meowing when you end up talking into it. It's really, 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 really strange. There's a lot of different ways that synthesizers can work. This one works in its own unique way that only Boss and Roland can fully comprehend, but it will take the input and turn it into this synthesized sound. I will say that if you want the full effect of the synthesizer, to put the decay at 100, and that way it'll always be on when you go to use it. But yeah, this is the synthesizer. Lo-fi is really interesting. What lo-fi does is it will take the signal and it will degrade the quality of that signal. To very briefly describe lo-fi, you can think of the audio signal as data, and that data is read by this machine, and it uses bits to read back that information. One is that it cuts up the audio sample into 44,100 different slices, which is read back in bits. And there are 16 bits that this device uses to read that. So 16 ones and zeros that it can use to label each one of those segments. So what the lo-fi does is it decreases the number of available bits that can be used to read back information. So what that ends up sounding like is a very degraded signal because it has less data to be able to read back the information. And sample rate just reduces the amount of slices that the signal is cut up. It can reduce the amount of data that is being read back through the device. Next is ring modulator. Ring mod is wild. Essentially what this thing does is it takes a stimulus and then it uses it as a carrier, similar to a vocoder, and then does some math to the signal and then outputs a sound that gives it a more ringing tone, which you can change the frequency of. Oh. Yeah, this thing is crazy. It takes your signal you put in and outputs a bunch of different signals in different frequency ranges. So that's why you can get highs and lows in whatever you're inputting or outputting. Up next we have guitar to bass. Guitar to bass is exactly what it sounds like. It'll take any guitar and turn it into a bass guitar. However, beatboxers and, well, a lot of loopers in general will use this to make really good bass lines. All you have to do is put a low note into the microphone and it will turn it into a very heavy bass line. And it can do a lot of useful things that we can add to other effects. But guitar to bass, very, very fun. It is, at least for most loopers, it's definitely one of our first effects that we like to play with because it's just, this is just so much fun to mess around with. Like, what? Up next is slow gear. Slow gear will take a signal and it will fade that signal in. So it'll start off with something with 0 volume, and then it'll bring up the volume of that thing. This is originally a trick used by viola players and violin players. It creates like this swelling effect. But we have it on the loop station here to give any sound or input that we put in that swelling effect. It can be used for guitar plucks really, really well. So if you have a guitar, and the slow gear is really, really helpful for, and is probably used a lot more commonly with guitar sounds than with beatboxing, for example. But that is essentially what the slow gear does. Up next is transpose. Transpose takes a signal and it will move the sound up or down a certain number of semitones. What that basically means is it will increase or decrease the pitch of your voice. Each one of these numbers is a semitone that it is bringing up. So if I have it on 0, my voice is normal, but as I bring it up, now all of a sudden I sound much more higher. And now I'm going to bring it down, and as I bring it down, my voice gets a lot more. Pitch bend does the exact same thing as transpose. It uses a different process, which is why it sounds differently. Additionally, it will increase or decrease the pitch by a lot more. If you want just a normal transpose, you can put it down an octave and up an octave, but you can go all the way up to 4 octaves and all the way down to 3 octaves. Additionally, you can be a lot more granular with your approach to the sound that you want to change. So with the transpose, you can only change it by semitones. With this, you can change it by what, micro semitones? I don't even know what these units are, but...
So, once again, I will show you what this thing does. You can bring it down.
And be very, very specific with the units that you are changing. Robot will take whatever signal that is put into the microphone, and it will put a bunch of filters on it, so then only the note that we specify comes out. So in this case, we have a B note, so now no matter what I say or how high or low that I make the note, it will come out as the B note. And the gender just controls how bright or muddy or dark the sound comes out is. Next, we have vocal distortion, another one of my favorite effects on this device. This will take the sound that is inputted and it will add some static to it, as well as clip the audio in a very specific way. So that's what this sounds like. You can hear that the audio itself is clipping, and as I turn up the distortion, you can hear my voice is distorted even further. And there's quite a lot of parameters with this as well that you can edit. Tone is just essentially its brightness. You can make it more bright, or you can make it... Vocoder is one of my favorite effects on this device. What it does is it will take a carrier signal or something that's already recorded, and it will use that to modulate your voice or your whatever you're putting into the microphone. Now, in order to get this to work, you have to have something already recorded, otherwise it won't do anything.
Now all of a sudden we have the vocoder on the actual output signal, and we can record this just as we would with any other effect. And then if we apply a reverb to it, oh my gosh, what a sound this is. Oh man.
Next up is dynamics. What dynamics does is this will take your voice and it will compress whatever you put into the input. So what compression basically is it takes quiet sounds and makes them louder, and it'll take loud sounds and makes them quieter. So it really hones in your vocal quality or whatever instrument that you happen to be using. This is very, very useful for recording just basic beats. Next up is EQ. Good old EQ, the thing I've been using this entire time. So what EQ is we have those frequency ranges I talked about with the filter, and it will either boost those sounds to make them louder, or it will reduce those sounds to make them quieter. And each one of these has its own given frequency range that it affects, and then we can also control the level as well, so the actual overall power and level of the signal coming in. Isolator is the opposite of a filter, where a filter will take a certain band range and it will just sweep across. So like a high-pass filter will just remove all the lows, or a low-pass filter just remove all the highs. A isolator will remove just one segment of the band and keep the rest. So for example, a low isolator will remove just the lows and keep the mids and highs. A mid isolator will keep the lows and highs but remove the mids. So it will bring those back in. As I talk, you can hear, we can even reduce it down even further. You can hear my voice being cut in and out. In this case, the lows are being cut in and out as the measure is going on. And this effect has a lot of parameters, but it's not used very frequently, which is really sad. There's a lot of potential here. Octave. The octave is kind of like the guitar to bass, except not as punchy and bassy. What it does is it'll take whatever signal that you input into it, and then it'll take the 1 octave lower or 2 octave lower of that signal, and then output it at the same time as the main signal that's coming in. So you can still hear me talking over the octave, and this controls the volume here of the extra octave that's in the background. But we can do 1 octave lower, 2 octaves lower, or we can play both at the same time, which sounds crazy. Pan is super, super simple. We have 2 audio channels. We have the left channel and we have the right channel. What that ends up sounding like is, if you're wearing headphones, this is probably sounding really weird to you, but it's panning my voice back and forth between the 2 channels. We can control it via 2 different ways, including even a manual pan, so where I can now put my voice on one side of your head, and then now it's on the other side of your head. Whoa! All right, that's annoying. Sorry, I'll stop. Next up, we have Tremolo. Tremolo is an effect that will fade in and fade out the signal that is brought in. So in this case, it will just raise and lower the volume of the signal that I am inputting right now. A slicer will take the sound and it will cut it off, so it'll stop actually outputting the signal that's coming in, and then it will play the signal that is coming in after a certain point. There are a ton of patterns to how it will actually cut up the sound, and you can control how often the cuts will occur, and as well as the amount that it is actually cutting. So we're cutting it at an 1/8 note, that's half of a beat here, and we have it very low so you can still kind of hear me. But as I turn this up, you will hear that my voice is now cutting. Slicer is really useful for changing up your sound and your song if you want to create new patterns. Great tool. Up next is Delay. Delay, it does exactly what you think it does. It will take the sound, the inputted sound, and it will repeat it over and over, and it will fade it out as it gets repeated. You can increase or decrease the amount of space in between each repeat, each repeat. I'm not going to do that. Each repeat. You can control the amount of time it takes for it to fade out or to disappear. And you can control the volume of the actual repeated portions. Panning delay is the same exact thing as the delay, except it combines the pan with the delay, so it'll pan the sound back and forth. This is really good for creating bass lines. For example, we'll just use this random stuff as a bass line. And it doesn't matter what you input, it will become bass line, which is super cool. Let's say you don't want it to be bass line, you can just have the panning delay at something more realistic, and now you can hear my voice panning back and forth. Tape echo is one of the very first tools that we had to be able to echo something. In fact, echo meant both a delay and a reverb at the same time back when this was invented. And then we figured out those are 2 different types of sounds. A tape echo is replicating the manual way to create an echo of something. And what's really cool is that it'll feed back into itself in like almost like a roll kind of portion. So even if we have the same input, it will change the actual ends of the tail ends of the sound. Ooh, 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 ooh. You can hear that it either goes up or down depending on how it feeds back into itself. Really cool. Yes, the granular delay. This is the OG oscillator bot for MK1 users. The granular delay, it can be used to make all kinds of different notes. It's essentially just a repeater. It does it in a specific way that the delay doesn't do. It puts it through a different type of filter. And we get these really, really crazy sounding vocals. A roll will take a certain input and it will just keep repeating it, for as long as the effect is on, and you can control all of those parameters individually as well, which is really nice. Chorus, I've alluded to several times when I was talking about phaser and flanger. The chorus will take the sound and it will duplicate it, and then it'll take that duplicated audio signal and it will delay it by a certain amount of time, and then it will modulate that signal just as it did with the flanger. But with the chorus, it delays it a little bit more, and you can control the modulation of the chorus of how it sounds. And it's supposed to give you this like multiple person kind of, there's more than one person singing kind of deal. It's just a cool effect that can cause some really, really weird stuff to happen. Oh my god. And our last input effect is the reverb. And the reverb makes it sound like you're in a room and you're really far away. Well, you can make it sound even more far away if you have your direct level down. So now you can only hear the reverb. The reverb is used in beatboxing all the time. It makes our sounds sound a lot more full and like we're taking up a lot more space. It is a ton of fun to be able to play with the reverb for sure. Up next we have Beat Repeat. That's on Track Effects A. Beat Repeat will take whatever is recorded and it'll repeat a certain segment of that thing that is recorded. And we can play it either forwards, backwards, or almost like a seesaw going back and forth between the two. It will start recording or repeating when we actually activate the effect. So whenever we activate it, that's when it'll actually start recording that piece and repeating it. The beat shift will take a sound that's already recorded and it will shift that sound or spin the recorded sound in a given direction at a certain amount of time. Basically, if you make a mistake and something is off by a little bit, you can shift it back on schedule, or you can create new beats with it or create your own slicer. You can do quite a lot with the beat shift. All right, we're almost done. We have the beat scatter. Beat scatter will take something that is already recorded and it will scatter it, or it will cut it up into segments that we can tell what the length of each segment is, and then it will mix those segments around. So it usually does it in segments of 4. Let's say we take one measure of sound that is recorded here, and we tell it to cut it into quarter note measurements. That will cut this one measure length thing into 4 segments, and then it'll take those 4 segments and mix them around in the pattern that we tell it to do. And finally, we have a vinyl flick. Vinyl flick is another DJ move that we can utilize here. It is essentially just taking the sound and doing a DJ vinyl flick with it. So you have the little disc that's playing in a circle. It's like taking your hand like this and, you know, there's a whole competition in the Worlds this year, or last year, that was all about vocal scratch. Super, super talented people. They're using this tool. So they actually hook it into their anus and they just play this effect, and all of a sudden, what is this joke, man? Oh, God. Yeah. Vinyl flick's fun. Oh, that's a lot. That's, I think, 31 different effects that you have on this thing. It's quite a bit of tools that we have that we can play with here. The MK2 has even a lot more than this, but hopefully you'll have a better understanding of each one of these. And if I end up doing every effect on the MK2, I can just talk about the new effects on the MK2, and I can skip all of these because I've already talked about all of these. And that is it. That is all of the effects on this device. I hope you were able to get some information out of this, at least get a more general idea of what each effect does. If you want to know more details, of course, you can check out all the tutorials that I've made on each one of these effects. Yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. This is a long video. I need to be able to fit a lot of effects in here. I really appreciate you watching this thing all the way through, and I hope you got some good information out of it. All right, I'll see you in the next one.